everybody. So for everyone that's joining now, we've had a bit of a change of plans with the way that we've set up these live Q&As. So I'm in Mozambique, and the internet is not amazing here. We are in rural Africa. So what we've actually done is we have Hannah in the UK, who's our social media manager, and she is hosting this. So basically, I've WhatsApp called her. I mean, this is very complex. I've WhatsApp called her, and her phone is facing another phone, and then that's what's hosting the live, in the hopes that the internet connection will hold up. So if it cuts out, like if my WhatsApp call goes dead, I'll get back on the phone immediately. So just stay tuned, and Hannah will tell some jokes.
I'll try.
Keep you all entertained. And if you hear a random voice from afar, that's Hannah reading out stuff because I can't quite see the questions that are being submitted and things. And Danielle should be coming online any minute. Danielle is our guest for this week, and she is the founder of Photographers Without Borders. They're on Instagram too, so you can check both Danielle and Photographers Without Borders out. We're talking about photography, we're going to be talking about conservation, we're going to be talking about storytelling for change, which is kind of what Photographers Without Borders do. If you have any questions, you can submit them as we go, and we'll do our best to answer them. I've got some questions lined up that you guys have already submitted now as well. So yeah, we'll do our best to get through them all. We're going to try and limit it to 45 minutes. And we might go a bit over, but we'll try our best to keep it to 10 minutes. Hi, Danielle!
Hey Jess, how's it going?
Yeah, good, thanks. I was just explaining to the audience about our new setup with these Q&As, so there might be a little bit of delay, but we can do our best to work with it.
She gave you an okay.
Okay, perfect. And should we start off for our followers that haven't read anything online yet? Do you want to just start off by introducing yourself and who you are and what you do?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Danielle. I know some people who are in here right now. So hey, and hi, Andrea. Hi, Barry. So I guess I describe myself as a photographer, director, a speaker. I am an activist. I'd call myself a conservationist or a protector, which is my preferred language. And just overall somebody who really believes in the power of connecting with the earth and changing the way that we relate to everything around us through my work. So that's how I would describe myself. It's really nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
No worries. Do you want to describe a bit about your current work and your current projects?
Yeah, so obviously as a storyteller, you're never just doing one thing. So there's lots of things on the go for me. I guess also I should have added that I'm the founder of Photographers Without Borders. So a big part of what I do is being the CEO of the organization. And so that carries a lot of responsibility. Part of what we've done to sort of pivot what we do online is start a series called Storytelling for Change. So it's a series where people can tune in, listen to some of the most noteworthy storytellers in the world, or people that engage in storytelling on some level or making change on some level, and just having really great discussions with them, and then having tools and takeaways as well come out of those sessions for our viewers. So that's really exciting. We have a really awesome guest coming up on Friday. I'll mention that later, I guess. And I also, I'm involved. I've just did a talk for Nat Geo a few months ago, and I'm working on some other stuff for them right now. I am working on an exhibit that's coming up next month. It's called Sugarcane, Sweetgrass, Saffron. It's a collaboration with my two mentees that I'm a mentor. I'm running a mentorship program right now called the More Than Photographer Mentorship. It's sponsored by Sony. Oh yeah, I'm also a Sony ambassador of sorts. I'm a Sony Alpha Female, as they call it. as they call it. And I'm working on I just finished my first feature film, and it's called Reckoning with the Wendigo. So that's something we're trying to get distributed. It's actually quite timely, given what's going on, because it looks at food insecurity and just the way that we've become so disconnected from the land. And it invokes the Wendigo, which is an indigenous spirit, a spirit from indigenous stories, mostly in the Cree and Anishinaabe communities. And it's this warning about how, when we overconsume and we take too much, that we can become this like cannibalistic kind of creature called the Wendigo, and so the whole documentary uses that Wendigo as allegory for consumption, for, the forces around us that are just, compelling us to take too much. And it talks about the hope that lies in the indigenous worldview, essentially. So that's something we're trying to distribute. So lots going on.
Busy. Do you think a lot of people kind of are having downtime at the moment with this whole lockdown situation around the globe, but actually people are just moving online? And I know a lot of freelancers, NGO runners, we're all just moving online, so we're still busy, but just in a completely different way. It's so weird.
So weird. It's been fun.
Yeah. So for followers that might follow you and don't currently follow us, just a quick intro to Love the Oceans. So and who I am. So I'm the founder, and I run an organisation called Love the Oceans, which is a charity in Mozambique, hence the rubbish internet and this MacGyver setup. And basically, we're trying to achieve a marine protected area in our region in rural Mozambique. So we do a heap of different areas of research and community outreach. We do fisheries, humpback whales, coral reefs, ocean trash, megafauna, and then we have 2 community outreach projects as well. So we kind of pride ourselves on a holistic approach. And we've been in existence, this is our 6th year at the moment. And we met Danielle, how many years ago now? I think we first talked in 2016, I think.
Yeah, I wanted to say 4 years maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's been a while. And then actually met in person when you guys came out in 2018. Yeah, you and Jeff. And filmed the documentary that's on our website at the moment. That was with Topics Without Borders. So yeah, if you want to check that out, go check that out. Everyone on the chat, not right now. Stay tuned to this right now. You can check that out afterwards. And then we thought we'd get you on, Danielle, to talk about what you do. And we had a bunch of questions. So if you're cool with it, we'll just dive straight in.
I'm cool with that. That's great.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so first of all, what would you say got you into filmmaking and photography? What started you on that kind of path?
I think more than storytelling, what's most important to me is making an impact in a good way. So a lot of my life was spent trying to figure out what kind of impact I wanted to make, figuring out myself, what mattered to me, who I was, where I stood on a lot of things. And getting to know more about sustainable development and the problems around us only made me more and more passionate to want to do something to address those things. And so, my early path through life wasn't even in storytelling. It was in sustainable development, like working with the United Nations, think tanks, academic institutions around research on climate change governance and conservation. But I found that the way to impact people for me was not going to be through those institutions. It was going to be through people's hearts, right? And so that's where storytelling became so important to me. So I've definitely stumbled into storytelling as a means of telling stories that are going to have that impact, that are going to shift people's mindsets, hearts. Because if there's anything I know now, it's that people aren't necessarily swayed by information and facts, and especially certain types of people. And I think it does take some form of experience, whether it's lived or whether it's through like, you know, documentaries or photography or, you know, stories around us. That's going to be the way. So that's kind of where that all happened and all started.
How old do you think you were when you started like doing photography and filmmaking?
I think when I was younger, I really, really, really wanted to be a filmmaker, but I was so intimidated by the filmmaking world that those dreams kind of got pushed aside. You know, I was very artistic as a child, so I can't say exactly when it happened. I was always interested in film and filmmaking. But just because I was really good in school, I think, and my family, you know, they're two newcomers to Canada who just wanted me to succeed and like wanted all of the fruits of their labor to amount to something. So I was really like kind of pushed a little bit more into the academic side. So I think I was pretty young when I realized like I loved arts and I loved the filmmaking and photography. But in terms of doing it professionally, it was my early 20s.
Yeah. Okay, and couple of like career questions. Where did you do your masters, and would you recommend doing doing formal training in videography or photography before going into a career in that area?
Okay, so like I said, I did not study photography. So I did my master's at the London School of Economics, representing right now, actually. Randomly. I don't know if you can see that. I'm wearing my LSE sweater. So I went to the London School of Economics for my master's. I studied sustainable development. And before that, I had degrees in conservation biology and psychology. So I've always been very interested in the intersection of how people think, how we frame messages, narratives. My whole dissertation was around climate change messaging and how best to have right-wing authoritarian folks, conservative-minded folks, how we could frame messages to get them to agree with a renewable energy policy. So that was really interesting and eye-opening for me. And in terms of photography and filmmaking and formal schooling, I never had any formal schooling. And so I personally don't think it's necessary to do formal schooling. I find that a lot of my friends who did that ended up dropping out at some point or becoming demoralized in their art making. So, you know, that being said, I do teach a really cool course for a college called Environmental Visual Communication. So I teach storytelling for change within that as a module for that. So courses like that, I think, are really interesting, where you're intersecting like ideologies, frameworks, as well as skills, like, and channeling it to make change on an environmental level. I think that's really cool. And I also teach Photographers Without Borders workshops. And I think workshops to me are like the best thing for anyone who's interested in art making to do, because you're working alongside people who are actually working in the field and like who are succeeding at it. So, and you know what I mean? Like, it kind of, to me, makes more sense to learn from somebody who's successful rather than somebody who's teaching in an institution.
Yeah, definitely. Like, the workshops are like really, so you get like so much information in such a short amount of time. I think that's one of the best ways to learn.
Yeah, totally. And I've taken workshops with lots of different people, and I think that's also like, it keeps your mind and your ideas fresh because you're taking in so many different viewpoints. And you know, you can agree, you can disagree, you can take, and that's what helps you develop your own unique style as well, right? Like by seeing other people's work and how they work, and then seeing what you like from it and maybe what you don't like from it, and like taking what suits you, and then that becomes something unique.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen it in action here because you guys run one workshop with us in Mozambique. And it's so cool seeing like the transition, because you guys do like sessions on like each, almost like modules on like different topics. So there's like one on ethics and stuff, and it's so interesting seeing like the story aspect, because obviously I've heard you talk about like storytelling change quite a lot, and Jack obviously as well, who leads that workshop. But it's another thing seeing it kind of in action and seeing like people taking photos. And for us, because it's obviously documenting our NGO work, so it's like taking photos, but then telling like a story within those photos just on that like one day or couple of days that people were shooting. And it's so cool to see like stories come together, and then each program participant does like a whole presentation where they kind of show and tell the story that they've made using these photos, and there's usually like a personal aspect as well if it's photographing humans, so they have like kind of the backstory and really have like researched the subject as well, which I think is really cool in photography when people, because it's one thing to take a photo of something, but it's another thing when you actually can give it context and describe that person's journey, and I think it makes the photo even more poignant, right?
Yep, totally agree. I think it's so fascinating, like watching. I always tell all my participants that, you know, don't ever compare yourself to anyone else. Compare yourself to yourself, you know, and it's really amazing to see the growth and progression from, yeah, like you're saying, from beginning to end, and how, you know, in 2 weeks you can like learn to craft a story, even if you have no experience at all, you know. And some folks come out as like underdogs in the sense that like, wow, like you can grow like just so much with the right tools and the right nourishment, you know, the right attitude, all those
it's
things.
so cool. Yeah, I mean, like, I do a little bit of photography, but I didn't do any formal training either. The only thing that I kind of wish I'd done a little bit of training in, like formal training, just because the formal training teaches you like well, I don't know actually because I've never done it, but I assume that the formal training would teach you like the logistical aspects of the camera, like I did a shoot recently with a friend that did do formal training, and she was like, oh, just press this button, and she like said whatever the official name of the button was, but I just learned like my camera for what it did, like rather than have the official name of the button. So in terms of like knowing your way around gear, obviously you can read that online as well, so you don't really need to do formal training, but I think sometimes that could help, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, and people learn differently too, right? So it just kind of depends how you want to learn as well, and who you want to learn from, you know. I just hate seeing people get demoralized because, you know, they're being taught by somebody who's in a power position who may not have their best interests in mind, like, and also because of the way that you have to be graded in a school type of setting, like that's the kind of thing that makes me struggle with. I struggle with that framework when it comes to art. But anyway, I think especially for filmmaking, yes, actually, if I could go to film school, like, that would be great. Because I've definitely done a lot of learning on the fly, and it always feels like I'm just learning as I go sometimes. And, you know, maybe that would have been something beneficial for me. But, you know, and it did take me a long time to you know, photography, it was a lot easier to break through the, I don't know, the glass or whatever, but like for filmmaking, it was a lot more of an endeavor, you know, to figure all that out on your own. And
yeah, I did some videoing for a liveaboard in January recently, and I've never done underwater videography before, and I just was like completely learning from, like, I read some stuff online before I went, and then just like winged it. And yeah, it's much more difficult. The photography I could do, but the videography is, there's so many different aspects to it, and filmmaking in general as well. You've got all the edits and everything. Yeah, it's complex. Okay,
yeah.
more questions. So, what was your journey? I think we kind of already touched on this really, but I'll ask it anyway. What was your journey after your master's that enabled you to reach where you are now?
Not a straight one. A very twisted journey to getting here. That would take a long time, I think, to discuss, but I will say that it was like a very it was a transformative journey where I've had to face myself on so many different levels and planes of existence, I think. And I think a lot of the struggles that I've had, or like obstacles I've overcome, have been ones that are internal, because I don't know. I'm just somebody who finds manifesting things a lot easier when I'm like clear in and I'm aligned in my spirit, and my values, my actions, my thoughts. And that's taken a long time to get to a point where I feel like, like where I can really make things happen. But I feel like I've struggled a lot with a lot of different things, and that's all part of the journey, right? So I'm not going to be like, I went to school and then I got this job and then I got this thing. It's like, yes, all of that happened, and it took a lot of hard work and a lot of relationship building. But knowing yourself and knowing where you're going, like if you know where your compass is going, then it's so much easier to just like have all of the right things come into your life to support that. Because if you're not in the right state of mind, if you aren't, mentally well, if you're dealing with mental health issues, which I was for a long time as a result of sexual assault and just like, transgenerational trauma and lateral violence and all of those types of things that, I've had to struggle with. All of that has pushed me to where I am, in the sense that I've had to experience so many difficult things at a young age, which caused me to think about the world in so many different ways. Really stripped me of a lot of the privileges that I may have had, at certain points in time, where, like certain experiences or certain understandings of the world or things like that really humble you and make you realize that we have so far to go, and so, a lot of what I do is driven by that motivation and that passion to align not just myself, but to help align the systems that are in place that support humanity and human lifestyles and things like that in a way that is in relationship with the rest of the natural world. So it's taken just a lot of learning, and like I would say that I've just followed a very organic path of going from A to B to C in a way that's grounded in the present and trying to resolve whatever I'm facing in the present to get to the next point. And as you do that, as you work through things and as you face yourself, I think you just keep, I don't know, you keep coming into wherever it is that you're going, right? And so I don't know if that just sounds like a bunch of gibberish, but that's my best answer.
Like making sure that you stay true to like your own path and navigating where you are and that kind of stuff is really important when you're getting to, well, yeah, I mean, like I've had conversations around manifesting a lot recently, and it's really something that I've begun to, I didn't really like get it before, and now it's definitely something I kind of believe in, and I think that like manifesting stuff is really important, and yeah, knowing where you want to go as well, step by step is important too. So
yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay, next question. Why did you found Photographers Without Borders? So you sustain love the oceans. Why did you found Photographers? What motivated you to like do that in particular, and how did you do it as well?
Right. So I did say that I had worked with some like multilateral international institutions, and academia, and I also dabbled in politics. Like when I lived in Boston, I ended up going to an Obama rally and just got so unexpectedly passionate about how politics and organization and like just bringing people together can really like found a movement. So I started like campaigning for the Obama campaign, and I learned a lot during that time. And I think it's such an important sphere of existence. But anyway, so my bigger point being that working in those bigger institutions, you just see so much, so like you see where all the problems are very quickly. Sorry, someone tried to call me. You end up having, you end up seeing that there's so many issues with like this top-down model of like 5-star development. And like I said, my interests initially lay in sustainable development, just as a response to, all of the inequity that I was seeing in the world. So when I say sustainable development, I'm talking about how we can create systems that are sustainable and regenerative even, and how we can help alleviate people from poverty, from sickness, and all of these things, and create an equal playing field while also maintaining the environment, because the earth and its systems are all obviously supporting us, not just humans, but all life on this planet. So when you see that as the problem, then you have to look at, okay, well, what's the solution? So then the solutions that I was seeing in these top-down kind of levels was just a lot of, like I said, 5-star development, kind of these expert-made solutions that didn't really consider local communities, especially local indigenous communities, or their way of life or their way of being. It kind of just took models of, colonial development and tried to, place them in these other places, where in many cases, I would say around 80% of cases failed, right? Like all this money being poured into this colonial style development that actually served, obviously, the colonial interests of the neoliberal world and the globalized world, right? So sorry if I'm going off on a big tangent here, but essentially when I saw that, I was like, okay, I don't see that as the solution. It just didn't sit right. And so I started working with more grassroots organizations on my own volition, by volunteering, just to see the difference and to see how different models could play out. And you see a lot more success when you look at grassroots models that are developed by communities, community-led, because they come up with more creative solutions to problems that their communities face. They speak the language, they know how the community operates, they aren't trying to change what's existing, they're trying to adapt around it. And, the top-down doesn't like that, because it doesn't allow you to kind of just take money and put it into a model, and then it's more messy. You have to be more you have to treat every situation and every problem as individual, and so my bigger epiphany just came around the idea that grassroots communities are the ones that we should be supporting and funneling this money into. And it's nice to see that a lot of international institutions are now going that route. But 10 years ago, that was just not happening. And so for me, it was that combination of realizing that storytelling can have this huge impact. And then how can we harness that power for the most grassroots communities? So that's essentially where the birthplace of it began, but specifically it was in India, in a project in India where I was working with a community of Dalits who are the lowest. They don't even have a caste necessarily. So in India, there's this caste system, a social hierarchy that you're born into, and so the Dalit community is they don't even have a caste. They're the people who traditionally would clean latrines and do the dirtiest jobs, and they're called Dalits or untouchables because people of higher caste would be considered dirty or not inauspicious if they were to touch these people or interact with them. So that still exists today, even though it's abolished technically. And so I was working with this community, and they were struggling with malaria, sickle cell anemia, because they're an indigenous population to India, and sickle cell is actually an adaptation to malaria. So a lot of this community has it, and so they have these health needs now, because they've changed their ways of living, they've come into contact with other communities, all of this. So they have problems with health, and then they also have problems with education, because now to kind of thrive in this modern world, you kind of have to have an education in order to be able to participate in society. And so the problem with the education system there was that, these big development agencies were trying to create a school for the Dalit communities, and the Dalit communities are much of them are dispersed on the outskirts of the city, so kilometers and kilometers away. So the ask was basically they build these nice government schools, and then they'd say, okay, the Dalits can now enter the schools. But you're asking small children, 5 years old, little girls, little boys, to walk basically 20 kilometers, because there's all these social inequities that cause other, they don't have shoes, they don't have bus fare. If they take the bus, they're still very little, and things can happen to them along the way. Child abuse and rape is a big problem in all parts of the world. So long story short, the community I was working with, they were going into the communities, instead of asking the community to come to these 5-star giant institutions. They were going out to the communities and instead serving them in their communities with like mobile medical units and teaching women and people from those communities how to teach so that they can like have a sustainable school system within their own communities. So that's where it all started. And I took some photographs during that, brought them home, and it was like, when I was trying to talk to my academic colleagues about it, it was like everything just goes over their head, just like it's probably going over everyone's head right now. But when you show people photographs, imagine I was showing you beautiful photographs and stories, alongside what I'm saying, it would just have that much more impact. So, and that's what happened. And I was able to raise a bunch of money to build more schools in these communities. So, yeah.
Oh, awesome. Okay, cool. So, moving on to a bit more descriptive stuff. What's your favorite thing about photography and taking photos? I think we've already kind of touched on this. I'm assuming that it's storytelling through photos, but correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, storytelling's part of it, but the bigger part of it for me is I wouldn't be a storyteller if I didn't have any purpose with it. Like, I wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't to achieve a larger outcome. So I think for me, tangible change is more important than anything.
Yeah. So that's your favorite thing about photography? Tangible change?
Sorry?
Is that your favorite thing about photography then? Or the use of photography, I guess? Creating tangible change?
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Like having storytelling for sure is like the larger piece, right? That's how you create the tangible change. But yeah, I actually also, I guess I could say, like, it's meditative. Photography to me is meditative, and it's something that allows me to process what I'm seeing in the world. It allows me to, it's evidence, right? Like, if we didn't have photographs of certain things, you look at COVID-19, like, there's so many people with their conspiracy theories about how it's not even happening, it's not real. And, it's a lot of it, I have my own ideas as to why we're not seeing as many images as we normally would if, like, this was a crisis somewhere else, let's say Africa, for example. Like, there's a lot more, when there's something that impacts people from, the global north and the west, we tend to have more respect for some reason, like more ethics when it comes to like photographing and documenting like disturbing imagery. That's my kind of take on it. And so I think, photography is evidence, right? And it can be manipulated as well, right? It can be utilized in ways that are out of context. But to me, I just think that there's so much power that lies in photography and being able to document and process. And, people use it for all different reasons. I don't know, like there's sometimes when I use it to express myself, so it's more fine art than it is documentary. And it's beautiful to be able to have the skills and tools to do that.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Do you have in fact, actually, no, we're going to go to, what is the best thing about your job?
Oh, the people that I get to meet, and the people and relatives in terms of like just the wildlife, the beings around me, being exposed to different ways of being and different ways of thinking is my favorite thing. And my job has allowed me to travel to like over 90 countries. Like, I've just been so privileged and lucky to be able to do that. So there's a lot I love about my job. I love my team. I work with like the best people. I have people like you in my life, like all over the world, who are inspiring me every day, inspiring me not just to keep doing what I do, but to be a better human myself, like not to be in denial and to just address things head on that need to be aligned. Yeah. There's a lot to like.
Huh?
There's a lot to like. Lots to
Yeah.
know.
Well, I'm sure there are quite a few budding photographers here and videographers and filmmakers, so yeah, they'll probably be listening to that and getting excited. But in contrast to that, I also think it's really important that people realize that jobs like yours and ours, and jobs that can seem like that they only have perks, also do have you've worked really hard for it, and there are some hard parts to the job as well. So what would you say is the hardest aspect of your job?
I think definitely like getting here has been very difficult, like getting to a place where I feel like I'm in like a flow, you know. I mean, I'll be honest, like there were times when I was living in women's shelters, you know, like where things were so bad, where I was taking risks on my career, and like, you know, when my family wasn't supportive, and, you know, they were disappointed that I had gone this path instead of, you know, working at the United Nations continually. And like, just, you know, just there's a lot of that to struggle with, a lot of mental health issues. You know, it hasn't been easy getting here, wherever this is. And I think times like this show you also just how fragile everything is, right? Like there's no security in this type of job. You're not considered an essential worker in this type of environment, right? Like you're not considered essential at all. Artists are essential to me. I think that without artists, people wouldn't be watching Netflix at home, and you know. So clearly there's some value there, but it's hard. It's precarious sometimes, you know, when you are living contract to contract, or like if you rely on contracts for your work, or like, you know, you don't have I luckily do, like I pay like as an individual for my own extra benefits, even though Canada's got universal health care. It's still something that, you know, I feel like is important to have. And so, you know, but for a lot of artists, for a lot of photographers, a lot of storytellers, you know, you have to keep finding the next thing that never ends. There's none of that like security that you get from having like a paycheck come in, or like benefits rolling in, you know. Yeah.
Yeah, not having those luxuries. And kind of along the same lines-ish, what has been your best and your hardest moment on a shoot? So not necessarily in your career, but like when you're on a job.
Yeah. Yeah, best and worst, eh? So I would say the worst one that I've like, the worst shoot I've ever had was one that just didn't want to happen. So about 5 years ago, I was in the Amazon doing a story on the Matses community, and they are they're very private, and they live in like deep in the jungle. And so it was like this never ending journey to get to this community. And it was like, there were floods. I remember like we were in Iquitos in Peru, and like waiting for our boat to go upriver. Like we had to like go up a river for 8 hours, and then stay in a village, and then wait for the chief to come and get us, and then walk with our bags over our heads through a river. Like there was this whole plan to do all this stuff and to get there. And it was just like at every juncture, like things were just happening that were not allowing this to succeed. So we got with a week of struggle, like we got finally to the village where we were supposed to meet the chief. And then finally when the chief arrived, like we literally we had no phones, no nothing. Like there was no method of contact, just like runners, right? So there was a point where he finally arrived, and we were literally just living in this beautiful old couple's like front porch, living in like hammocks with, you know, mosquito nets on them, just waiting, no clue when this guy is gonna come, and when we're gonna finally meet him. And then he ended up coming and was so apologetic because there had been so many rains, and it had flooded, you know, the point where we were supposed to like carry our bags over our heads for like kilometers wading through water, that it was all flooded apparently, like over, like, so there was no way we could even get into the community. And by that time we had waited so long that we ended up having to just turn back, and like, so we ended up doing a different story on something else, like just finding another story. So being adaptive and like not letting that kind of stuff get you down, like that can happen anytime, right? Like, like this kind of work is precarious. Like, you don't, when you're following stories or you're finding stories, you don't know, like, things can happen. You just have to like really be adaptive and make the best out of every situation. But yeah, I remember that being like, I felt like it was like I was just like, oh my God, like what am I doing with my life? And I was also just so excited, you know, for all of it. And it was just like, okay, well, we just have to roll with the flow, right? So the best,
definitely.
The best time.
Yeah, now the best.
The best time. Well, definitely when I came to visit you, Chess, and got to do the Love the
You have to say that.
That was obviously the best time of my life. I do remember like being over there where you are. Like, you guys have no idea. Chess is so lucky right now. Like, there's nowhere I'd rather be in isolation. So I remember when I first saw. We came to Guinjata Bay like in the middle of the night. We had to take a car for like several hours to get there. And on the way got harassed by the police. And it was like this really funny thing, actually, because I was like, you know what, forget this. They made us like take all of our stuff out of our bags one by one. And then they tried to like bribe us or whatever. But so I was like, okay, when I open up my bag, I know exactly what to do. Like, I go straight for the tampons and straight for the pads. And like, I'm like, here you go. And I just like put them in these guys' hands. And they were like, okay, you can put your stuff away and you can go. And then they didn't know I could speak like Portuguese, so then I told them in Portuguese afterwards. I was just like, you know, like that it's so wrong that you are doing this. Like, what would your mother think of you? And they were just like, oh my God. Anyway, but when I got to Guinjata Bay, it was the middle of the night. It was super dark. So then I remember waking up in the morning after that like crazy night and just like looking outside and being like, oh my God, it was like paradise. Like, and I've been to so many beautiful places, but where you are, where Chess is, it's like glittering water, white sand, humpback whales, like just jumping like every 2 seconds. It's like a haven. I honestly don't even want to tell people like about it because it needs to be like a secret. Like, let it remain a haven for these whales. But yeah, that was definitely one of the best times. And then, yeah, more recently, it's yeah, I've had a lot of good times, but that was great.
You were saying more recently, what was the thing that you were going to say?
Oh, I was gonna say, yeah, just more recently, like the documentary that we're now trying to distribute. It's filming that was one of the greatest privileges of my life. We went up to the James Bay in Canada. So for those that don't know, the James Bay is where Hudson Bay Company first created their some of their first outposts in Canada. So it's really like one of the birthplaces of what you call Canada now, because it's where like the early British settlers came and took advantage of the native trappers, of the indigenous trappers, the Cree community, and essentially got them to do a lot of labor and find all the best furs, and then took advantage of them by creating this fur press. So they would say, you know, okay, like if you give us this many furs stacked up to the height of a flint gun, then we'll give you like X amount of beads or tobacco or sugar or alcohol or whatever it was they were trying to get them addicted to. And then they created this fur press, which we still like laud as this like invention of the time. You know, it's like there's as if it was this wonderful piece of machinery that was invented. And they used it to press the furs down so that every time they would come with like a stack of furs, say it was 10 furs that came up to the height of a flint gun, now they would press it down so that they'd be like, oh, sorry, you got to go out and like, you know, because now it would be half the size because you pressed them, flattened them down. You have to go out and get like double the amount. So anyway, so that whole process of colonization and of taking advantage of the trappers caused like a huge food insecurity issue, because indigenous communities obviously like lived off the land and lived from wild game and from harvesting other like nuts, berries, things like that, fish, And so they lost a lot of their natural food sources, and then when they went to like say no, like we're not going to do this anymore, by that time like there had been so many settlers that are already like coming in with their missionaries and trying to like re-educate people, and like so much had been done already, like there'd been so much settlement that like it was so hard for them to fight against what was happening. And anyway, so those communities were largely affected by that whole process of colonization, and as were all communities all over the world. But it caused this huge food insecurity issue. And the crazy thing is that the Hudson Bay Company still has like this remnant. So where they controlled the fur trade back then, now they control the food, because it's one grocery store that like basically exists on each reserve, called the Northern Store. And they're like a subsidiary, like they're no longer owned by Hudson Bay, but they were like originally like branched off of the Hudson Bay Company. So and it's the only place where people can go to buy groceries, because of the mines and because of all the like overhunting back in the day. Like a lot of the wild game and the fish and the waters are poisoned, and there's a lot of mercury poisoning. There's just so many issues that has stopped people from being able to live off the land and live their traditional practices. And then of course people were completely traumatized during the residential school era, where the missionaries went into communities, set up schools, and then basically robbed them of their culture, like abused them in so many different ways. And that was like one generation ago, you know what I mean? Like there's still people that with lived experience from that. So it's caused like just so many problems in these communities, and they're fly-in only communities, so that those grocery stores live within a bigger chain, right, of like in the value chain. Like they own the airlines, they own the trucks that bring the food up to like the last airport before it has to get flown into the community. So they're able to charge whatever prices they want. So you're looking at like $50 for some Tim Hortons coffee, like $50 for a turkey, or for like a bag of frozen chicken nuggets. Like stuff that costs us like $5 to $10, like costs them like 10 times as much. Yeah. And these are people who've been struggling as it is, and then you're going to gouge them on food prices. And like on top of that, our hydro companies basically get power from those communities, because that's where all of like the waterfalls and the waters are and the dams are. And then we send that energy down to like the big cities, right, and subsidize that, and then it gets sent back up to them. So they're getting charged ridiculous amounts of money for electricity as well. So anyway, because of all of these problems, and because the media has gone into these communities and kind of like put the pity lens, the poverty porn lens on, and kind of like just made it seem like it's their own problem, these communities have become very suspicious of foreign, like kind of people from outside the community coming in with cameras and things like that. So for me, one of the most amazing parts of my job and of my life and experiences was getting to film the documentary, like being allowed into those spaces. Like it just, to me, was the greatest honor ever, like being invited to the sweat lodges and ceremonies. And just, I'm not Indigenous, I'm a person of color, but I personally also believe that it should be Indigenous people that are telling these stories. And I was asked by 2 Indigenous producers to help direct and film it. So that's the only kind of case where I would like be okay doing that. But to be allowed and to be welcomed into those spaces, I think for me is one of the best experiences.
Yeah, that sounds pretty amazing. Where can people watch that? Is it online at the moment, or is it like coming up for release?
So it's going through film festivals right now. It's also we're looking at different networks who are interested in distributing it. So it's at that stage where we're not quite putting it online until we figure out all that. But I will keep people informed, and we do have a website. It's just photographerswithoutborders.org/Wendigo. Okay, cool. Perfect. Okay, and then just to wrap up, I'm aware that we're running out of time. I know. So just some career advice. So we had one question: what type of camera is the best for someone who is looking to get into filmmaking? Yeah, Sony. I been using an A7S. I used Sony even before I became an ambassador. They have superior products, lots of amazing capabilities for low light cinematography, and like I just love smaller equipment. Like I just would prefer to shoot on something smaller than something gigantor. And they do have like amazing, like, you know, I shoot on the A7S II and the A9. You know, the FS7 is a great camera as well, if you want to like go large. But I really like, for me, half the process of filmmaking is in how your presence is felt. And so I feel like with a smaller camera, you're able to just like blend in a lot easier and have people kind of like just forget that the camera's there. So for documentaries and documentary filmmaking, it's phenomenal. And there's no shutter, there's no like sounds, so it's just a lot more of like it's not such a large presence. Yeah.
Okay, and then the last question, have you got any advice for people looking to get into either your industry or a similar one?
Into my career or a similar one? Is that what you asked?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I think definitely if you want to be a storyteller, like make sure it's in your blood and your bones and you're ready to cry and to bleed and to do all of the things necessary. I think for sure, just like follow your where your intuition is guiding you. If you're constantly attracted to stories, to film, to photography, and you're just like, there's this yearning inside of you, listen to that. I think that's the most important thing. And then just follow the next piece of where that goes organically, you know? So like if you hear about a workshop or you see a thing and you're like, you know, that really aligns with my interests, and that really, or, you know, you pick up a book and you're like, you know what, like I really should read this. I think the key is really investing in yourself and taking calculated risks, right? It's like a combination of all of those things. And then like preparing yourself by obtaining as much of the knowledge and the wisdom that you can to really see if that's right for you. Get in contact with people, watch things like this, you know, like, and just follow your intuition.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Before we wrap up, do you have any questions or that people ask you that you want to answer, or anything that you want to say to the audience?
I just want to say that I want to encourage everyone, like, doesn't matter what you do or what you want to do. I think following your path instead of trying to construct one, like the path of least resistance is always the one that your like inner self is guiding you towards, right? Like, so a lot of us, I think, spend a lot of time constructing things and building careers that aren't what we want to do. And then like the last thing you want is to like end up being an older person and like, you know, just regretting or like wishing you had done this. So like make sure that you like live a life, you know, where you're living in the present, where you're doing the things that you want to do now. Don't live a life where you're waiting for the future to enjoy whatever it is you want to enjoy. And there's another thing I can recommend to everybody to look at, which Christina Mittermeier put me onto. It's called Ikigai. It's a Japanese concept that means reason for being. And if you can figure out what your Ikigai is, then you will be living a great life. So, you know, the Ikigai is the combination of what you're good at, what you love, what you can get paid for, and what the world needs most importantly. So if you can figure out what it is that intersects all of those things for you, then I think, you know, all the power to you. You'll be flowing in no time.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you very much for joining us for this Q&A. And for people that only tuned in halfway through or missed some of it, we're going to try and get this up on our YouTube afterwards. So we'll post about that. Hopefully that will happen. It's dependent on the internet connection, but we're hoping that will happen. Yeah, keep tuned to see that. and you can check our Instagram. Danielle, she's on Instagram, so you can check out her Instagram as well, and Photographers Without Borders, which is the organisation she runs, is on Instagram too. So you can check all of that out, and there's loads more information on both of our websites. And is it all right to say if people have questions that they think of after, that we can pass them on to you, and you'll do your best to answer them?
Of course, yeah, just DM me or comment on one of my photos randomly. I'll try my best.
Perfect. Thanks so much for joining us, Danielle.
So much fun. I love you, girl. Thanks so much. Enjoy the weather.
Have a good evening.
You too.